All right, welcome back, everyone. Today's deep dive, it's something a bit different. We're stepping away from the usual historical texts or data sheets. Instead, we're going to explore this incredibly detailed world, but we're doing it through the lens of a game.
Which is a fascinating way to approach narrative, I think.
Exactly. We're diving into the static in their voices. And honestly, this isn't just, another board game or whatever. It really feels like a meticulously crafted narrative experience.
It pulls you right in. The premise alone is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is chilling. So our mission today, we want to unpack its really clever core gameplay, peel back the layers of its super immersive lore, and ultimately kind of reveal how every single mechanic, every card you might play, actually weaves into the story itself.
It's like a shortcut almost to understanding this whole complex universe they've built.
Right. So just try to imagine this. A world where words, actual words, are a kind of plague, where speaking can literally heal you, and silence becomes the ultimate currency for survival. That's the unnerving reality we're jumping into.
Let's do it.
Okay, so to even begin understanding how you survive in this world, you need to get the core challenge of the game itself, the fundamental rules for rolling.
The absolute basics.
It seems simple, right? The active player rolls 2 dice, adds them up for their score that turn.
Standard enough.
But here's the twist. The other player, the opponent, then rolls 1 die, and they subtract that number from your total for the turn.
Right there, that's the tension.
Exactly. And the goal is just to be the first player to hit a target score, say 35.
Yeah.
Crucially, though, your score can't drop below 0.
Yeah, that 0 floor is important. But the real genius, I think, is how that simple setup turns every dice roll into this psychological duel.
How so?
Well, that immediate subtraction, it's not just taking points away. It feels like your opponent is actively, personally trying to silence your progress.
Huh. Yeah, I could see that.
It forces you to be constantly reacting, thinking ahead. It adds this really interesting layer of tension and strategy to what looks like just a basic dice race.
Okay, so that constant push and pull, that tension you mentioned, that's where action cards fit in.
Precisely. They're your way to fight back against the randomness and the opponent's interference. You play them from your hand for these one-time effects.
Designed to influence the dice rolls, give you a bit more control back.
Exactly that. In a world that feels chaotic, these cards are like your strategic toolkit, your agency.
Can you give some examples? Like, what can they actually do?
Sure. So take the shield card. Simple effect. It just cancels out your opponent's subtraction roll for that turn. Gone.
Like putting up a temporary wall.
Yeah, exactly. A sonic wall, almost.
Yeah.
It mechanically represents that need for quiet, for control, just for a moment. Or there's reroll. Lets you pick up any number of your own dice and roll them again.
A little defiance against fate.
Right. And then something like double down lets you roll 4 dice instead of 2 for your addition. A big gamble.
Pushing your luck.
These aren't just, random buffs. They feel like the desperate gambles and the fleeting moments of control that survivors in this world would cling to.
So it sounds like even these small tactical choices have real thematic weight. Can you give another example? How does a card mechanic tie directly into the world's lore?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the forced silence card. Its effect. Your opponent cannot play any action cards on their next turn.
Ooh, harsh.
It directly mirrors the Bureau's whole ideology, their fanatical censorship and control. You're literally silencing their options.
Wow. Roll.
Or consider the jukebox distraction card. It forces your opponent to re-roll their subtraction die.
Why a jukebox?
Because in the lore, jukeboxes blasting music became these unlikely safe zones in the wasteland. The noise could actually deter the infected stutterjacks.
No way.
Yeah, so the card forcing a re-roll, it's like that distracting blast of music giving you a brief advantage. It connects the mechanic straight back to a specific survival tactic in the world. It makes the game feel grounded in its own reality.
That's really clever. Okay, moving beyond the immediate turn-by-turn stuff, what about victory cards? You collect these after winning.
Right. You win a game, you get awarded one. And the interesting part is, before the next game starts, you choose just one from your collection to activate.
And it gives you a small passive bonus for the whole match.
Exactly, like a little persistent edge.
Sounds like a good reward for playing more. But how do they tell a story? Are they just buffs?
No, they're much more than that, I think. If you look at the bigger picture, victory cards are like narrative artifacts, little pieces of history.
Explain that.
Well, each card has a name and often a bit of flavor text that hints at its origin. Like, Blackwood's top hat, it might give you a small reroll bonus, or Tin Can Fortress maybe gives a defensive boost. Each one represents a person, a place, an event from the world's backstory. So when you collect them, you're not just getting game advantages.
You're collecting fragments of the lore itself.
Exactly. You're piecing together the narrative through play. Winning becomes this act of uncovering the world's history bit by bit.
Okay, that brings us nicely to the lore itself. This is where it gets really, really interesting and pretty chilling. Let's dive into the world lore, the origin of the Devil's Verse.
It starts strangely mundane, almost.
Right. No giant meteor, no zombie virus in the traditional sense. It begins with a seance in a Chicago theater, 1939.
And it wasn't even real occultists, apparently, just fakes doing a show.
And they unknowingly read from some cursed book, and bam, they unleashed this thing called a mimetic pathogen, the Devil's Verse.
And what's truly terrifying about this plague, as they call it, is how it works. It's not biological, not really.
It spreads through sound or sight.
Yes. It infects the mind. People hear or see the verse, and it takes root. They become stutterjacks, compelled to repeat fragments of it endlessly.
Like a mental virus.
Exactly. And that compulsion, that mental decay, eventually leads to this horrifying physical transformation into these creatures called dead voicers.
So it's not just gore, it's psychological horror. The corruption of thought, of communication itself.
Precisely. It raises that question, doesn't it? What happens when words, the very thing that connects us, become the weapon, the source of destruction? It's deeply unnerving.
And the game picks up when?
The main setting is 1959, so 20 years after that first utterance in Chicago.
And America is, well, it's a post-apocalyptic wasteland. But it still has this very distinct 1950s aesthetic, which is a cool juxtaposition.
Yeah, diners, greasers, but overshadowed by this constant threat.
And the key phrase from the lore is, literacy is dangerous and silence can mean survival.
Stark, isn't it?
So with that fundamental fear of words of communication, how did society even react? What groups emerged from all that chaos?
Well, society fractured, as you'd expect under that kind of pressure. 3 main factions rose up, each with a radically different idea about how to deal with the verse.
Okay, who are they?
First, you've got the Bureau. Think fanatical descendants of some old government agency. They saw the verse, especially after it started appearing writing the written plague of 42, and decided the only answer was total eradication.
Eradication
of books, of all written text. They launched this infamous Great Purge in 1943, burning libraries, destroying records. Their solution is silence through destruction.
Wow, extreme. Who else?
Then there's the Signal Corps. These guys are descended from a top-secret military tech program. They holed up in fortified bunkers around 1945, hoarding all the pre-fall technology they could find.
And their goal?
Science. They believe the answer is technological. They're desperately trying to create a counterverse, some kind of signal or frequency to neutralize the original verse. They even tried their first big broadcast in 51. Tech is their salvation.
Okay, so destruction versus technology. What's the third way?
Faith, or perhaps scholarship. The Order of the Sacred Word. They're sort of religious group, scholars really, who believe the cure, a verse of healing, is actually hidden somewhere within old world literature.
So the opposite of the Bureau. They want to preserve knowledge.
Exactly. They're actively searching for this cure. They had a breakthrough in 46, discovered that certain religious texts could temporarily stop a stutterjack's compulsion. That discovery really fueled their whole mission.
Control, science, faith. A classic conflict.
Played out in a terrifyingly silent world, yeah.
Okay, let's trace a few key moments from this timeline of the verse.
Yeah.
You mentioned the origin in 39. What happened next?
Well, the initial attempts to contain it failed spectacularly. The Chicago quarantine in 1940. Total disaster. The verse spread nationwide, unbelievably, through telephone lines and even written letters.
Oh, man. How do you quarantine that?
You don't, really, which led to the National Security Act of 1941. Publicly, the government downplayed it, blamed it on Axis psychological warfare.
A cover-up.
Yep. But secretly, they formed the Bureau of Silence, the precursor to the faction we know in 59.
And things just got darker from there, I assume.
Much darker. Fast forward to 1950, the Boston Mutilations. The Bureau captured members of the Order of the Sacred Word and publicly removed their tongues.
Oh, that's brutal.
It cemented the absolute hatred between those factions. No coming back from that.
Were there other powers rising up besides these main 3?
Oh, yeah. The collapse of central authority meant power vacuums. You saw the rise of independent groups like the Greaser Road Gangs during the Highway Wars starting around 47. They became major players controlling travel and resources.
Like localized warlords.
Kinda, yeah. The Bureau even tried to crush them in the Toll Road campaign of 57, but failed miserably. The highways remained dangerous and contested.
So people had to find ways to survive outside these big factions, too.
Absolutely. Ingenuity flourished, born of desperation. You got still airs popping up in 51, these isolated communities built underground, often in old mines or subway tunnels, where the geology naturally dampened the verse's transmission.
Wow. And you mentioned the jukeboxes.
Yeah, jukebox sanctuaries became a thing around 54. Discovering that loud, continuous music could actually deter stutterjacks led to fortified diners and bars blasting music. 247. Strange pockets of noise in a silent world.
The level of detail in this world building is just incredible. Even environmental hazards evolved.
Right. The verse itself didn't stay static. Around 1955, new horrors emerged, like the echo cacophony. Imagine the verse literally getting imprinted onto the landscape. Certain areas just resonate with it. Walking through them is dangerous, even if no one's speaking.
That's terrifying.
And then later that same year, the first recorded choir attack. Huge groups of infected stutterjacks and dead voicers gathering and creating these devastating sonic waves through their combined utterances.
Like a biological weapon.
Essentially, yeah. And even the factions weren't stable. The Order had its own internal crisis in 57, the schism.
Or what?
Ideology. They were finding these old texts that seemed to have almost magical effects against the verse, but they couldn't agree on how to use them. Preservation versus weaponization, basically.
So this whole timeline, it's not just backstory, is it?
Not at all. It meticulously explains why the world is the way it is in 1959, when the game starts. This tense, violent stalemate between factions, the specific dangers players face, the strange survival strategies. It all grew out of this history.
It shows the plague evolving, humanity's desperate responses, brutal, sometimes contradictory.
Exactly. And if you connect it to the bigger picture, it feels like a commentary on, information itself, who controls it, what happens when you try to enforce purity, whether it's silence or a specific ideology. It's heavy stuff, woven into the world's fabric.
You can really see how deeply that fabric is woven, especially when you look closely at the cards again. Let's connect a few more specific card examples directly back to that lore.
Good idea.
Okay, take the Greaser's Wrench action card effect. Subtracts points straight from your opponent's score. Simple damage. But the flavor text says something like little persuasion on the broken highway.
Right. And that immediately tells you something.
What does that single card really say about life outside the main factions?
It perfectly captures that lawless, confrontational vibe of the highway gangs, doesn't it? It's not just abstract damage. It feels like direct physical intimidation. Survival through brute force, because the official rules are gone. You feel that grit every time it's played against you.
Okay, how about a card that reflects the sheer unpredictability, the danger of the verse itself?
The Static Burst action card's a great example. The effect is you just end your turn immediately. Bank whatever score you made.
Just stop. Why?
Look at the flavor text. It's a panicked radio call, probably from the Signal Corps. Can't get a clean signal. Bank what you've got and pull back.
Oh, okay.
It perfectly mirrors that constant danger. Clean communication is rare. The verse can interfere at any moment. Sometimes the smartest move is just to cut your losses and retreat. The mechanic feels like trying to get a message out before the static overwhelms you.
That makes perfect sense. And those victory cards, the passive ones, how do they subtly deepen the lore?
Let's take the first book burned. The lore snippet might talk about, say, a scorched page of Tom Sawyer saved from the Bureau's very first public book burning.
Right. And its effect.
It lets you cancel one opponent's action card once per game.
So it's like a tiny act of defiance.
Exactly. It's a mechanical representation of preserving something small against that overwhelming tide of destruction and censorship. It echoes the whole conflict over knowledge.
And maybe one more. Something reflecting the victims.
How about a stutterjack scrawl? The lore might describe, a meaningless, repetitive pattern scribbled frantically on a diner napkin by someone infected.
Goopy. And the mechanic.
It makes your opponent lose an extra point the very first time they roll a 1 for their subtraction die during the game.
So it punishes a specific kind of failure.
Yeah, it punishes that low failed roll in a way that evokes the mental deterioration caused by the verse. That frustration of a broken mind, a broken action, reflected right there in the dice result. It's subtle, but adds this layer of thematic consequence.
What's really standing out here is how incredibly cohesive it all feels. The mechanics aren't just dropped on top of the lore. They seem to grow right out of it.
They feel like reflections of the world's dangers, the factions' methods, the ways people try to survive. Nothing feels arbitrary.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How much does gameplay that feels so deeply tied to its narrative enhance your understanding, your experience of a fictional world, compared to games where, story and mechanics feel like separate things?
It makes a huge difference, I think. Immersion goes way up.
So there you have it, our deep dive into the static in their voices. We've looked at the clever dice mechanics, the layers of strategy in the card play.
And we've immersed ourselves in this really unique, post-apocalyptic 1950s America where just speaking or reading can be a death sentence.
It's quite a world.
And I think this dive really shows how a carefully built narrative can lift a game beyond just, rules and points. It becomes an experience.
Yeah.
And it kind of invites you to think, doesn't it? If silence is survival in their world, what are the verses, the difficult truths maybe, that we're afraid to hear or speak in our own world? What parts of our own story, our collective history, do we risk losing when we choose to silence certain voices or ideas?
That's a powerful thought to end on. We really hope this sparked your curiosity today, gave you some insight into how these kinds of intricate worlds can be built piece by fascinating piece.
Yeah, through mechanics, through lore, through art.
Which makes us wonder, and it may be something for you to think about too, what other kinds of core ideas or maybe even complex social concepts do you think could be woven so effectively into game mechanics or other interactive systems? What other stories could be told this way?